The seamstress's fingers were bleeding again. But Violet Zimmerman kept sewing because Mrs. Henderson needed her dress by tomorrow, and there were 3 more orders waiting after that. The year was 1878, and in Wallace, Idaho Territory, a woman alone had to work twice as hard to survive, especially when that woman had nothing but a needle and thread to her name. Violet sat in the cramped room behind her shop, the lamp flickering as another draft swept through the gaps in the walls. Her own dress, the only one she owned, had been mended so many times that more of it was patches than original fabric. The hem dragged threads, the collar was frayed beyond repair, and the sleeves had been let out and taken in so often they barely held together. But she could not afford to waste good fabric on herself when every scrap meant money for food or coal for the stove. The bell above her shop door rang just as the sun began to set. Violet glanced at the window, surprised anyone would visit this late. She set down the dress she was working on and walked into the front room, wiping her bleeding fingers on a rag she kept hidden in her pocket. The man who stood in her doorway barely fit through the frame. He had to duck his head to enter, and his shoulders seemed to span the width of the entire entrance. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back loosely with a strip of leather, and his face was tanned and weathered from years in the mountains. Muscles strained against the fabric of his buckskin shirt, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had faced down bears and lived to tell about it. "You are the seamstress." His voice was deep, roughened by sparse use. "I am, Violet Zimmerman." She straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated by his size. "What can I do for you?" He stepped fully into the shop, and she caught the scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to him. His eyes, a striking shade of gray, took in the room with a single sweep before landing on her. Those eyes lingered for a moment, and she became acutely aware of her threadbare dress and the way she had tried to hide the worst of the damage with her arms. "Name is Archer Yates. I need a new shirt. This one has seen better days." He gestured to a long tear in the shoulder that had been roughly stitched with what looked like fishing line. Violet nodded, reaching for her measuring tape. "I can do that. Come closer to the lamp so I can take your measurements." Archer moved with surprising grace for a man of his size. He stood where she indicated, and she had to reach up considerably to measure his shoulders. The muscles beneath her hands were solid as stone, and she tried to focus on the numbers rather than the warmth radiating through the worn fabric. "You live up in the mountains?" she asked, making conversation as she worked. "Have a cabin about 15 miles north. Come down every few months for supplies." "That must be lonely." "It is quiet. There is a difference." She moved around to measure his chest, and that was when he looked down at her properly. His eyes caught on her hands, still bearing the small spots of blood from where the needle had pricked her throughout the day. "You are hurt." "It is nothing. Happens when you sew as much as I do." She quickly withdrew her hands and wrote down the measurements. "I have some fabric that would work well for a shirt. It will take me about a week if that suits you." "That suits me fine." He reached into a leather pouch at his belt and pulled out coins. "How much?" She named her price, the same she charged everyone, though it was less than the work was worth. Archer counted out the coins and then added 3 more. "That is too much," she said. "It is what the work is worth." His tone left no room for argument. "I will be back in town in a week." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "You should make yourself a new dress." "That one is falling apart." Heat rushed to Violet's cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. "I have orders to fill. My clothes can wait." Archer looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in those gray eyes. No one should spend all their time clothing others while they themselves go cold. Then he was gone, the bell chiming softly in his wake. Violet stood in the empty shop, her heart beating strangely fast. She told herself it was anger at his presumption, at the way he had noticed what she tried so hard to hide. But as she returned to her work, she found her mind wandering back to those gray eyes and the gentleness in his rough voice when he had noticed her bleeding hands. The week passed in a blur of needlework. Violet completed Mrs. Henderson's dress, then a suit for the banker's son, then new curtains for the saloon. Each night she worked on Archer's shirt, taking extra care with the stitching. She told herself it was simple pride in her work, nothing more, but she found herself choosing the strongest thread and reinforcing the seams twice over. When Archer returned exactly 7 days later, the shirt was ready. She had wrapped it in brown paper, tied with string she had salvaged from a previous package. He entered the shop just after noon, his presence seeming to fill the small space. Violet found herself smoothing down her dress before she could stop herself, though it did nothing to improve its appearance. "Your shirt is ready." She retrieved the package from behind the counter. Archer unwrapped it carefully, examining the stitching with an attention to detail that surprised her. His large hands handled the fabric gently as he turned it over, checking the seams and the collar. "This is good work, very good work. Thank you." Something warm bloomed in her chest at his approval. He pulled off his old shirt right there in the shop, and Violet quickly turned away, though not before she caught a glimpse of scarred, tanned skin stretched over more muscle than she had ever seen on any man. She heard the rustle of fabric as he pulled on the new shirt. "You can look now." She turned back to find the shirt fit him perfectly. The fabric stretched across his broad shoulders without straining, and the length was exactly right. He moved his arms, testing the range of motion, and nodded with satisfaction. "This will do well, thank you." He reached for his coin purse again, but Violet shook her head. "You already paid. That was for the shirt." He placed several coins on the counter. "This is for fabric, for yourself." "I cannot accept that." "You can and you will." His voice was firm but not unkind. "A person who works as hard as you do deserves to have something for themselves. Buy fabric. Make a dress that is not held together with wishes and prayer." Before she could protest further, he was gone again. Violet stared at the coins on her counter. It was more than enough for good fabric, enough for a complete dress with money left over. Her pride wanted to refuse it, to run after him and return it. But her practical side, the part that had kept her alive through 3 hard winters alone, knew that would be foolish. She picked up the coins slowly, feeling the weight of them in her palm. When had anyone last cared whether she had decent clothes? When had anyone noticed her at all, beyond what she could sew for them? That evening, after she closed the shop, Violet walked to the general store. Mr. Patterson looked surprised to see her examining the fabric bolts instead of buying the cheapest thread and a small bag of flour as she usually did. "Help you find something, Miss Zimmerman. I need fabric for a dress, something practical but nice." She chose a deep blue cotton that reminded her of the sky at twilight. It was not fancy, but it was new and whole, and the color made something in her heart lift. She bought enough for a complete dress, along with new thread and buttons that actually matched. That night, instead of working on someone else's order, Violet cut the fabric for her own dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she made the first cut. It had been 3 years since she had made anything for herself, 3 years since her father died, and left her alone with nothing but his debts and the sewing skills he had taught her. She worked late into the night, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something like happiness. Over the following months, Archer came to town regularly. Always he had some reason: new pants, a winter coat, repairs to his existing clothes. Violet suspected he was inventing reasons to visit, because the buckskins he brought in were rarely more than slightly worn. But she never said anything, just took his measurements and sewed what he asked for. Each time he paid her too much. Each time she protested. Each time he ignored her protests and told her to buy something for herself. "You are doing this on purpose," she said one afternoon in October as he placed extra coins on the counter yet again. "Doing what? Overpaying, making excuses to come to town." His gray eyes met hers directly. Is that a problem? She should say yes. She should tell him that she did not need his charity, that she could take care of herself. But the words would not come, because they would be a lie. She looked forward to his visits now, found herself watching the door and listening for his heavy footsteps. "No," she said quietly, "it is not a problem." Something shifted in his expression, a warmth entering those stormy eyes. "Good, because I plan to keep doing it." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why do you care if I have decent clothes or enough to eat?" Archer was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and honest. "Because everyone in this town takes from you and gives nothing back. Because you work yourself bloody and wear rags while you clothe them in finery. Because when I look at you, I see someone who deserves better than what she has been given." Violet's throat tightened. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are kind because Mrs. Henderson told everyone you did not charge her full price when her husband was out of work. I know you are strong because you have survived alone when most would have given up. I know you are talented because everyone in Wallace wears clothes you made." He paused. "And I know that when you smile, which is not often enough, the whole room seems brighter." Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Archer, I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. Just let me do this. Let someone take care of you for once." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Winter came early that year. By November, snow was already piling high in the streets of Wallace, and the wind howled through every crack in Violet's shop. She wore her new blue dress, and a shawl she had knitted from wool Archer had bought her, but still she shivered as she worked. Archer had not been to town in 3 weeks. The snow in the mountains would be even deeper than in Wallace, and she worried about him alone in his cabin. What if something had happened? What if he was hurt or trapped? She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting north, toward the mountains and the man who lived there. The bell above her door chimed, and she looked up hopefully. But it was only Mrs. Henderson, come to collect the coat Violet had made for her husband. "Dreadful weather," Mrs. Henderson said, brushing snow from her shoulders. "I cannot imagine being out in it any longer than necessary." "Is my husband's coat ready?" "Yes, of course." Violet retrieved the coat from the back room. She had lined it with an extra layer of wool to help keep out the cold. Mrs. Henderson examined it critically, then nodded. "This will do, though I do think you could have used better buttons." The buttons were the best Violet could afford, bought with her own money because Mrs. Henderson had refused to pay extra for them. But Violet said nothing, just accepted the payment and watched the woman leave. She returned to her work, trying to ignore the way the cold seeped through her shawl. The coal in her stove was running low, and she needed to make it last as long as possible. Fuel was expensive, and she had spent more than she should have on a warm blanket she desperately needed. The door opened again an hour later, bringing with it a blast of freezing wind and snow. Violet looked up and her breath caught. Archer stood in the doorway, covered in snow, his face reddened from the cold. He carried 2 large bundles under his arms and what looked like half a tree on his shoulder. "Archer, what are you doing here in this weather?" He set down his burdens and brushed snow from his hair. "Brought you wood. Your stove sounds like it is dying. You came down from the mountain in a snowstorm to bring me firewood. Roads will be impassable soon. Wanted to make sure you had enough to last the winter." He gestured to the bundles. "Also brought dried meat and some preserves. You are too thin." Violet did not know whether to laugh or cry. "You cannot keep doing this. You cannot risk your life in a blizzard just to bring me supplies. It is not a blizzard yet, and I can do whatever I want." He began carrying the wood to the back room, stacking it neatly by her stove. "Where do you keep your coal?" "I have enough coal." He turned to look at her, and she knew immediately that he could tell she was lying. "Show me." With a sigh, she led him to the small bin where she kept her coal. There was perhaps enough for another week if she was very careful. Archer's jaw tightened. "This is not enough. It is what I can afford. I will manage. You will freeze." He ran a hand through his wet hair, clearly agitated. "The general store still open?" "Archer, no." "You have already done too much." "The general store," he repeated. "Is it open?" "Yes, but I cannot let you do this. I cannot keep taking from you and giving nothing back." He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides. Suddenly, he was standing right in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Those gray eyes were fierce with an emotion she could not quite name. "You think you give nothing back. Every time I come to town, you welcome me. You talk to me like I am a person, not just some mountain hermit. You smile at me. You made me shirts that fit better than anything I have ever owned. You gave me a reason to come down from that lonely cabin." His voice dropped lower. "You made me remember what it feels like to care about someone." "Archer," she whispered, "I am going to the general store to buy coal. You can argue with me or you can accept that this is happening. Your choice." She looked up at him, at the determination in his face and the concern in his eyes. Something crumbled inside her, some wall she had built around herself after her father died, and she realized she was truly alone in the world. "Okay," she said softly. "Thank you." His expression softened. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers were rough and calloused but impossibly gentle. "I will be back soon. Lock the door behind me and stay warm." He left, and she did lock the door, then stood with her back against it, her heart racing. The place where his fingers had touched her face seemed to burn with warmth. Archer returned an hour later with the general store's delivery wagon, piled high with coal and more firewood. Mr. Patterson himself helped unload it, shooting curious glances between Violet and Archer. "This should last you through the winter, Miss Zimmerman," Mr. Patterson said. "Mr. Yates here bought enough to heat the entire town." "Just making sure she does not freeze," Archer said gruffly. "That a problem?" "No problem at all. Good to see someone looking after her." Mr. Patterson tipped his hat to Violet and left. Violet watched as Archer filled her coal bin to overflowing, then stacked more in the corner. The wood he piled neatly against the wall, enough to supplement her stove for months. When he finished, he was covered in coal dust and breathing hard. Violet fetched a rag and handed it to him. "You did not have to do all that yourself. I could have helped. You work hard enough." He wiped his face and hands. "Besides, I am stronger." She could not argue with that. She had felt those muscles herself when she measured him for shirts. "Will you stay for supper?" The words came out before she could second-guess them. "It is the least I can do after all this." Archer looked surprised, then pleased. "I would like that." Violet had little to offer, just some beans and bread, but she warmed it on her now well-fueled stove, and they ate together at her small table. It felt strange to have someone else in her space, but also right somehow. Archer's presence seemed to fill the room without overwhelming it. "Tell me about your cabin," she said as they ate. "What is it like living up in the mountains? Quiet, peaceful." "I built it myself after I left the army, wanted somewhere far from people and their wars." He broke off a piece of bread. There is a stream nearby that runs year-round, good hunting in the woods. In summer the meadow fills with wildflowers. It sounds beautiful. It is, but it is also lonely. His eyes met hers. More lonely than I realized until I started coming to town and meeting you. You were in the army, he nodded. Fought in the war between the states, saw things I wish I could forget. When it ended, I just wanted to be somewhere quiet, somewhere I did not have to watch people die. I am sorry. That must have been terrible. It was a long time ago. But she could see the shadows in his eyes, the weight of memories he carried. What about you? How did you end up alone in Wallace? Violet told him about her father, a tailor who had taught her everything he knew. How they had come west looking for a fresh start after her mother died of fever. How her father had died 3 years ago from a fall, leaving her with debts and a failing shop. I thought about leaving, going to a bigger city where there might be more work. But Wallace was the last place I lived with my father. It felt wrong to abandon it. She looked down at her hands. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. You made a place for yourself, built a business, survived. That takes courage or stubbornness. Sometimes they are the same thing. He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less burdened. They talked as the snow continued to fall outside, as the stove crackled and filled the room with warmth. Violet could not remember the last time she had felt so comfortable with another person. Archer listened when she spoke, really listened, and his own stories painted pictures of a life she could barely imagine. When the hour grew late, Archer stood reluctantly. I should go. I have a room at the boarding house tonight. Too dark to head back up the mountain now. Violet walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. Thank you again. For the wood and the coal and the supplies, for everything. You do not have to thank me. He pulled on his heavy coat. I will come back tomorrow before I head home. Make sure the stove is drawing properly with all that new coal. I would like that. He paused in the doorway, snow swirling around him. Violet, I know I am just a rough mountain man with more scars than sense. I know you could probably do better. But I want you to know that I care about you, more than I have cared about anything in a very long time. Her heart squeezed. You are not just anything, and I care about you too. The smile he gave her was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. Good. That is good. He left, and she watched through the window as he walked down the snowy street, his broad shoulders hunched against the wind. She touched her fingers to the cold glass and allowed herself to hope. Archer came by the next morning as promised. He checked her stove, adjusted the flue, and made sure she knew how to bank the coals to keep the fire going all night without wasting fuel. Then he lingered, clearly reluctant to leave. Snow has stopped, he said, looking out the window. I should head back while the weather holds. Will you be all right up there alone? What if another storm comes? I have weathered worse. My cabin is solid and I have plenty of supplies. He turned from the window to look at her. But I will miss you. I will miss you too. I will be back in 2 weeks, sooner if the weather allows. He hesitated, then crossed to where she stood. Can I hold you? Just for a moment. In answer, Violet stepped into his arms. They closed around her, strong and warm, and she pressed her face against his chest. He smelled of pine and wood smoke and something else that was uniquely him. She felt his cheek rest against the top of her head and allowed herself to relax into his strength. Be safe, she whispered, always. He pulled back just enough to look down at her. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, hoped he would, but instead he just looked at her as though memorizing her features. 2 weeks, he said. I will be here. After he left, Violet touched her face where his hand had been and smiled. The shop suddenly felt too small to contain the emotions swelling in her chest. She, who had been alone for so long, was alone no longer. The 2 weeks passed slowly. Violet threw herself into her work, but she found her mind wandering north at odd moments. She would stop mid-stitch and wonder what Archer was doing, whether he was warm enough, whether he was thinking of her too. She used some of the extra money he had paid her to buy fabric for a new dress, this one in a deep green that the shopkeeper said brought out her eyes. She worked on it in the evenings, taking her time, making it beautiful. She told herself it was not for Archer, but she knew that was a lie. When 2 weeks had passed and he did not come, she tried not to worry. The weather had been unpredictable, with more snow falling every few days. Perhaps he was simply waiting for it to clear. But as 3 weeks stretched into 4, worry gnawed at her. What if something had happened? What if he was hurt in his cabin with no one to help him? The thought made her sick with fear. She was closing up the shop one evening when Mrs. Henderson bustled in, her face alight with gossip. "Did you hear? That mountain man who comes to see you got caught in a snowslide up near his cabin. Miller's boy saw him in Mullen last week, said he had a broken arm but was on his way back here." Violet's heart stopped. Broken arm. Is he all right? Seems to be. Stubborn fool came down the mountain with his arm in a sling just to get supplies. Mrs. Henderson's eyes gleamed with curiosity. He must have a good reason to risk traveling injured like that. As soon as Mrs. Henderson left, Violet paced her small shop. Archer was hurt and apparently on his way to Wallace. When had he left Mullen? How bad was his injury really? The questions spun through her mind as the evening darkened into night. She was still awake when she heard heavy footsteps on the boardwalk outside. She knew those footsteps, had listened for them for weeks. She threw open the door before he could knock. Archer stood on her doorstep, his left arm bound tight against his chest with a makeshift sling. His face was drawn with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "You should not be out of bed," were the first words out of her mouth. "Come inside this instant." He obeyed, ducking through the doorway. Now that she could see him in the lamplight, she noticed the way he held himself, the careful movements that spoke of pain. "What happened? When did you break your arm? Why are you traveling when you should be resting?" The questions tumbled out as she helped him to a chair. "Snowslide 3 weeks ago. Caught the edge of it coming back from checking my traps. Pinned me against a tree and snapped my arm." He said it matter-of-factly, but Violet could imagine how terrifying it must have been. "Been healing up at the cabin, but I ran low on supplies, and I wanted to see you. You idiot, you wonderful, foolish idiot." Her eyes filled with tears. "You could have died. But I did not. I am right here." She knelt in front of his chair, taking his good hand in both of hers. "You could have sent word. I have been worried sick. I know, I am sorry. I just needed to see you with my own eyes, make sure you were all right." "I am all right. You are the one who is hurt." She stood. "Have you eaten? When did you last have a proper meal?" "This morning. Some jerky and hardtack." "That is not a proper meal." She said about warming the stew she had made earlier, cutting bread and pouring water. "You will eat, and then you will tell me everything the doctor said about your arm." He smiled tiredly. "Yes, madam." As he ate, Archer told her about the snowslide, how he had managed to dig himself out, how he had splinted his own arm and made it back to his cabin. He had stayed there for 2 weeks, living off his stores before the pain eased enough that he felt he could travel. "The doctor in Mullen said it should heal fine as long as I keep it immobilized, 6 weeks minimum." He flexed the fingers of his injured hand, wincing. "Make simple tasks a challenge. You cannot go back up to your cabin alone like this. What if there is another emergency? What if you need help?" "I will manage." "No." Violet surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "You will stay in Wallace until your arm heals. You can keep your room at the boarding house, and I will make sure you have proper meals and help with anything you need." "Violet, I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking, I am telling you." She met his eyes steadily. "You have spent months taking care of me. Let me take care of you for once." Something in his expression softened. "All right, I will stay." Over the following weeks they fell into a routine. Archer would come to her shop each morning, and she would make him breakfast. Then he would sit in the corner, watching her work, occasionally offering observations or telling stories. At midday, she would make lunch, and in the evening they would have supper together. It should have been awkward, having him there all the time, but it was not. Instead, it felt natural, as though he had always been part of her life. She found herself humming as she worked, smiling at nothing in particular. The shop seemed brighter with him in it. Archer helped where he could, using his good hand to organize her thread or hold fabric steady while she cut. He was patient and careful, and she appreciated his presence more than she could say. "Tell me something," she said one afternoon as she worked on a dress for the preacher's wife. "Why did you really leave the mountains? You could have stayed in Mullen until your arm healed. It is closer to your cabin." Archer was quiet for a moment. "Because I realized something while I was trapped up there alone, my arm screaming with pain and not sure if I would make it through the night. I realized that if I died, the only thing I would regret was not telling you how I feel." Her hand stilled on the fabric. "How you feel?" He stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling awkwardly beside her chair so they were at eye level. "I love you, Violet. I have loved you since that first day when you stood straight and proud in your threadbare dress and offered to sew for me with your bleeding fingers. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you see the best in people. I love the sound of your voice and the rare gift of your smile." He took her hand carefully in his good one. "I know I am rough and scarred and better with trees than people. I know I have little to offer but a cabin in the mountains and a heart that is yours for the taking. But I needed you to know. If something had happened to me, I needed you to know that you were loved." Tears spilled down Violet's cheeks. "You foolish man. You beautiful, foolish man. Of course I love you. How could I not? You saw me when I was invisible. You cared for me when no one else did. You made me feel worthy and valued and cherished." She reached up to touch his face. "I love you, Archer Yates. I love your gentleness and your strength and the way you make me feel safe. I love that you came down from your mountain in a blizzard just to bring me firewood. I love you." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "Can I kiss you, please?" His lips were soft despite the roughness of his beard. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, as though he feared she might break. Violet leaned into him, letting herself fall into the warmth and rightness of it. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Marry me," Archer said. "I know it is fast, I know we should probably wait, but I have wasted enough of my life on being cautious. Marry me and come live with me in the mountains, or I will sell the cabin and stay here in town, whatever you want, just be with me." "Yes," she did not hesitate. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his good arm pulling her close. Violet wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the love and hope and joy that filled her heart. They were married a month later, after Archer's arm had healed enough to properly hold her. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with half of Wallace in attendance. Violet wore her green dress, and Archer wore a new suit she had made him, dark blue wool that made his gray eyes even more striking. Mrs. Henderson cried during the ceremony, though whether from genuine emotion or because she would miss having prime gossip material, Violet could not say. Mr. Patterson gave them a set of dishes as a wedding present. The preacher's wife made a cake, and the whole town celebrated with them. But what Violet remembered most was the way Archer looked at her as she walked down the aisle, as though she were the most precious thing in the world. The way his hand trembled when he slipped the simple gold band on her finger, the way his voice shook when he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. "I promise to keep you warm and safe," he added, off script. "I promise to make sure you never have to choose between fabric for others and fabric for yourself. I promise to love you every single day for the rest of my life. I promise to sew your buttons back on when they fall off," she said, making him laugh. "I promise to make our house a home. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. And I promise to love you just as fiercely as you love me." When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Archer kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. They spent their first night as a married couple in Archer's room at the boarding house, but it was cramped and the walls were thin. So the next morning they began making preparations to move to the cabin. "Are you sure about this?" Archer asked as they loaded the wagon with her belongings. "It is isolated up there. You will be far from town, from your shop and your customers. I can still take orders and bring them down when we come for supplies," Violet said. "And honestly, I am tired of this town. Tired of sewing for people who do not appreciate it, tired of being alone in that shop. I want to see your mountains and your meadow full of wildflowers. I want to build a life with you, wherever that may be." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I will make you happy. I swear I will." "You already do." The trip up to the cabin took most of the day. The trail was narrow and steep in places, winding through dense forest that blocked out the sky. But as they climbed higher, the trees began to thin, and Violet caught glimpses of sweeping vistas and snow-capped peaks that took her breath away. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Wait until you see the cabin." They came around a final bend, and there it was. The cabin sat in a natural clearing, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Behind it rose the mountains, majestic and eternal. A stream bubbled nearby, and even in winter the area had a peaceful beauty that made something in Violet's chest settle. "Archer, it is perfect." He helped her down from the wagon, and she could see the relief in his face. He had been worried she would hate it, she realized, worried she would regret choosing him over town life. Inside, the cabin was simple but well made. There was a large main room with a fireplace, a separate bedroom, and a loft for storage. The furniture was rough but serviceable, clearly made by Archer's own hands. "I know it is not much," he began. "It is wonderful. It is home." They spent the next few days settling in. Violet organized the cabin to her liking, putting up curtains she had brought from town and arranging their dishes in the cupboard Archer built. She set up a work area near the window where the light was best, laying out her sewing supplies. Archer watched her make the cabin their own, and the look of contentment on his face made her heart full. At night, they lay together in the bedroom, wrapped in quilts and each other's warmth. Archer held her close, one large hand spanning her back, and Violet felt safer than she ever had in her life. "I used to lie here alone and listen to the silence," Archer said one night as the wind howled outside. "Used to think I liked it that way. But now I cannot imagine this place without you in it." "Good, because you are stuck with me now," he chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest where her head rested. "Best thing that ever happened to me." Winter slowly gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing the meadow Archer had told her about. Violet stood on the porch and watched as the first wildflowers began to bloom, scattered spots of color against the green grass. "I want to plant a garden," she told Archer. "Vegetables and herbs, maybe some flowers near the house. I will clear a spot for you." He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on top of her head. "Anything you want." She leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of his body supporting her. "I have everything I want right here." They fell into a rhythm of life that suited them both. Archer hunted and fished, tended his traps, and made improvements to the cabin. Violet sewed, both for the customers she still took orders from and for their own household. She made curtains and quilts and new clothes for them both. But mostly, they simply enjoyed being together. They took long walks through the forest, Archer pointing out animal tracks and teaching her which plants were edible. They sat by the stream and talked for hours. They lay in the meadow and watched the clouds drift by overhead. "I never knew life could be like this," Violet said one afternoon as they rested in the shade of a pine tree, peaceful, happy. "Neither did I." Archer twined his fingers with hers. "I thought I was content alone, but I was really just hiding. You brought me back to life." In May, they made their first trip back to Wallace for supplies. The town had not changed, but Violet felt different walking down its streets. She was no longer the desperate seamstress working herself bloody just to survive. She was a married woman with a home and a man who loved her, Mrs. Henderson cornered them at the general store. "Well, you two look happy. Mountain life must suit you, Violet." "It does." "Do you miss the shop? Miss town?" Violet glanced at Archer, who was examining rope with the intense focus he brought to everything. "Not even a little bit." She collected several orders from customers who were thrilled to hear she was still taking commissions. The pay would be useful, and she enjoyed the work. But it was no longer her whole life, no longer the only thing that defined her. That night, as they made camp on the trail back to the cabin, Archer pulled her close. "Are you sure you are happy, truly? Because if you are not, if you want to go back to town, we can figure something out." "I am happier than I have ever been. Stop worrying. Cannot help it. Worrying about you has become my favorite pastime." She kissed him, long and deep. "Then worry about this. I love you and I am exactly where I want to be." Summer came in full force, warm and golden. Violet's garden flourished, providing them with fresh vegetables. She made jams and preserves from wild berries Archer showed her how to find. She sewed new shirts for him, lighter weight for the warm weather, and made herself dresses in cheerful colors that matched the wildflowers. One evening in July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and pink, Violet realized she had not felt this content since before her mother died. She had not known it was possible to be this happy. "What are you thinking?" Archer asked. "That I love you. That I am grateful every day that you walked into my shop and saw me when everyone else looked right through me." He pulled her into his lap, settling her against his chest. "I am grateful you gave a rough mountain man a chance. That you looked past the scars and the silence and saw something worth loving. You are the best man I have ever known. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the peaks and the first stars appeared. An owl hooted somewhere in the forest. The stream babbled its eternal song, and Violet thought that if she could freeze one moment in time and live in it forever, it would be this one. In August, Violet began to suspect she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had not come, and she felt queasy in the mornings. She said nothing at first, wanting to be certain, but as the weeks passed and the signs became unmistakable, she knew she had to tell Archer. She chose an evening when they had finished supper and were relaxing by the fire. Archer was repairing a leather strap, his hands working with the easy competence she had come to love. "Archer, I need to tell you something." He set down his work immediately, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine, actually." She took his hands in hers. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her as though the words had not quite registered. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, so full of joy it made her own eyes fill with tears. "A baby. We are having a baby." "Yes. Sometime in late winter or early spring, I think." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, but she did not complain. When he pulled back, there were tears on his cheeks. "I never thought I would have this. A family. A child." His voice was thick with emotion. "I cannot believe it is real. It is real. We are going to be parents." He placed a large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, awed. That night he held her with infinite care, as though she were made of spun glass. Violet laughed and told him she was not so fragile, but secretly she loved his protectiveness, the way he looked at her like she held the entire world in her body. The next months passed in a blur of preparation. Archer built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving delicate patterns into the sides. Violet sewed tiny clothes and soft blankets. They discussed names and argued playfully over whether the baby would have her eyes or his. "I hope it has your strength," Violet said one afternoon as she worked on a baby gown. "I hope it has your kindness," Archer replied. As fall turned to winter, Violet's belly grew round. Archer became even more protective, hardly letting her do anything strenuous. She found it equal parts endearing and frustrating. "I am pregnant, not made of porcelain," she protested when he insisted on carrying even light loads for her. "I know. But humor me. I have never done this before, and I want to make sure you are both safe." How could she argue with that? They spent a quiet Christmas in the cabin, just the two of them. Archer had shot a turkey, and Violet roasted it with vegetables from the stores they had preserved. They exchanged simple gifts. She gave him a new coat she had sewn, warm and sturdy. He gave her a rocking chair he had built, perfect for nursing the baby. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," Violet said as they sat by the fire that night, "because of the gifts, because I am spending it with you." January came cold and harsh. Violet's time drew near, and Archer grew increasingly nervous. They had arranged for the midwife from Wallace to come stay with them for the last few weeks, a capable woman named Mrs. Thompson, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. "Do not worry so much, Mrs. Thompson said when she arrived and found Archer pacing. "Your wife is healthy and strong. The baby will come when it is ready, and we will be here to help." But on a snowy night in late February, when the contractions started, Archer's face went white. "It is all right," Violet said through gritted teeth. "This is normal. Mrs. Thompson, I think it is time." The midwife sprang into action, sending Archer to boil water and fetch clean linens. He obeyed, grateful to have something to do, but Violet could see the fear in his eyes. "I will be fine," she promised him. "We will be fine." The labor was long and difficult. Violet had known it would hurt, but she had not been prepared for the intensity of it, the way the pain consumed everything. But through it all, Archer was there, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. "You can do this. You are the strongest person I know. I am right here. I am not going anywhere." As dawn broke over the mountains, their son came into the world with a lusty cry. "Mrs. Thompson cleaned him quickly and laid him on Violet's chest, and both parents stared in wonder at the tiny, perfect human they had created. "He is beautiful," Archer whispered, touching one tiny hand with a finger that looked enormous by comparison. "He has your eyes," Violet said, tears streaming down her face. They named him Thomas, after Violet's father. Thomas Yates, born in a cabin in the mountains of Idaho Territory to parents who loved him more than life itself. Archer held his son with shaking hands, this huge mountain man terrified of dropping the tiny bundle. But Thomas settled against his father's chest, somehow sensing he was safe, and Archer's face transformed with a love so pure and deep, it made Violet's heart ache. "Thank you," he said, looking at her with eyes full of tears. "Thank you for him, for this, for everything. Thank you for finding me, for saving me. You saved me first." Mrs. Thompson stayed for 2 weeks, making sure both mother and baby were healthy. Then she returned to Wallace, leaving the new family to figure out life together. Those early weeks were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Thomas was a hungry baby who woke frequently in the night, but neither parent minded. Archer would bring him to Violet for feeding, then walk him around the cabin afterward, singing old army songs in his deep voice until the baby fell asleep again. During the day, Violet would sew while Thomas napped in his cradle, and Archer would work on the never-ending tasks of keeping them fed and warm. But they always found time to simply sit together, watching their son sleep, marveling at his tiny fingers and the way he would grasp their hands with surprising strength. "He is going to be big like you," Violet said one afternoon. "Or tall like you," Archer replied. "Either way, he is perfect." Spring came again, and with it, Thomas grew and changed. He started to smile, and his laughter became Archer's favorite sound in the world. The big mountain man would do anything to make his son giggle, making funny faces and sounds that had Violet laughing too. They took Thomas on his first trip to Wallace when he was 4 months old. The town made a fuss over him, everyone wanting to see the baby. Mrs. Henderson declared him the handsomest child she had ever seen, and for once her compliments seemed genuine. "Motherhood suits you," she told Violet. "You look happier than I ever saw you when you ran the shop." "I am happy. Happier than I ever imagined I could be." That summer they spent long days in the meadow, spreading a blanket and letting Thomas experience the grass and flowers. Violet worked on her sewing while Archer played with their son, and it was idyllic in a way she had never dreamed possible. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe this is real," she told Archer one evening. "That I have you and Thomas in this life. I know what you mean. I spent so long alone, convinced I did not deserve anything more. Then you walked into my life and changed everything. You walked into mine, remember? Ducking through that doorway because you are ridiculously tall," he grinned. "Best decision I ever made." As Thomas grew into a toddler, the cabin rang with his laughter and occasional tears. He was a happy child, curious about everything, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's smile. Archer taught him about the forest and the animals, while Violet read to him from the few books they owned and sang him songs her mother had once sung to her. 2 years after Thomas was born, Violet became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter arrived on a bright October morning, smaller than Thomas had been but just as healthy. "She looks like you," Archer said, cradling his daughter with the same awe he had shown their son. "She is beautiful." They named her Sarah, and she completed their family in a way none of them had known was missing. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help care for her. Archer and Violet watched their children together and felt blessed beyond measure. The years passed in a happy blur. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, while Sarah had her mother's grace and nimble fingers. Archer taught both children to hunt and fish and respect the wilderness. Violet taught them to read and sew and be kind. They made regular trips to Wallace for supplies and to maintain friendships, but the cabin in the mountains was their true home. It was where they felt most themselves, most at peace. One evening, when Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 8, the family sat on the porch watching the sunset. Thomas was whittling a piece of wood under his father's supervision while Sarah practiced her stitching beside her mother. "Tell us the story again," Sarah said. "About how you and Papa met." Violet smiled. "Which part? When he ducked through the door and nearly hit his head? Or when he brought firewood in the middle of a snowstorm?" "All of it," Thomas said. "Tell us all of it." So Violet did, with Archer adding his perspective here and there. She told them about the little shop in Wallace where she had sewn for everyone else while her own clothes fell apart. About the mountain man who had noticed what no one else did and made sure she was taken care of. About falling in love and building a life together. "And then you had us," Sarah said when the story ended. "And then we had you," Archer confirmed, pulling his daughter into his lap. "And our lives became even better." "Were you scared?" Thomas asked his father. "When you first met Mama," Archer considered the question seriously. "A little. I had been alone for so long I had forgotten how to talk to people, but your mother made it easy. She treated me like I mattered." "You do matter," Violet said. "You matter more than anything." As the stars came out, the family sat together in comfortable silence. Violet looked at her husband, still strong and protective after all these years, though his hair was starting to gray at the temples. She looked at her children, healthy and happy and loved. She thought about the young woman she had been, alone and struggling in that cold shop, bleeding fingers and threadbare dress. That woman would not have believed this life was possible. Would not have imagined she could be this happy, this fulfilled, this deeply loved. "What are you thinking about?" Archer asked softly. "How far we have come. How different everything is from what I expected." He reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing the old scars from needle pricks that had long since faded. "Better or worse than you expected? So much better. Better than my wildest dreams." Years continued to pass. Thomas fell in love with a girl from Wallace and married her, bringing her to live near them. Sarah discovered a talent for healing and became the closest thing the area had to a doctor. Both children built their own cabins within a few miles of their parents, close enough to help but far enough for independence. Archer and Violet became grandparents, and their joy multiplied with each grandchild. The old mountain man was just as gentle with these tiny humans as he had been with his own children, and Violet loved watching him play with them in the meadow where he had once played with Thomas and Sarah. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Archer led Violet to a spot in the forest she had never seen before. It was a clearing high up the mountain, with a view that stretched for miles. Wildflowers carpeted the ground, and a small waterfall fed a clear pool. "I found this place the summer after we married," Archer said. "I have been keeping it secret all these years, waiting for the right moment to show you. It is breathtaking. I thought we could build a bench here, somewhere to come when we want to be alone, to remember where we started." "I would love that." They sat on the grass, leaning against each other as they had so many times over the years. Violet's hair was threaded with silver now, and Archer's beard was more gray than black. But when he looked at her, she saw the same love in his eyes that had been there on their wedding day. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you every day for 20 years, and I will love you every day for the rest of my life. I love you too. You are still the best thing that ever happened to me." He kissed her there in the clearing, surrounded by wildflowers and the sound of falling water, and it felt just like their first kiss all those years ago in her little shop. They built the bench together, Archer doing the heavy work while Violet carved their initials into the wood. AY and VY, surrounded by a heart. It became their special place, somewhere they would hike to on summer evenings to watch the sunset and remember all they had been through together. More years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow. They lost friends and gained new ones. They watched their children and grandchildren thrive. They grew older but never grew apart, their love deepening with each passing season. On a spring morning much like the one when they had married, when Archer was 60 and Violet was 58, they sat on their porch watching the sun rise over the mountains. Archer's hair was white now, and his movements were slower, but he was still strong, still the protector he had always been. Violet's hands were gnarled from years of sewing, but they were steady as she worked on a quilt for their newest grandchild. "You ever regret it?" Archer asked suddenly. "Leaving town, giving up your shop?" Violet set down her needle and looked at him in surprise. "Not once. Not ever. This life with you has been everything I could have wanted and so much more. Good. Because I could not have done any of this without you. You made me human again. You gave me a reason to come down from the mountain and stay. You saved me first. I was dying in that shop, bit by bit, day by day. You saw that and you cared enough to do something about it." He took her hand, his grip still firm despite the years. "We saved each other then. We did." They sat in silence, watching the world wake up around them. Birds sang in the trees. The stream murmured its endless song. Somewhere in the forest, their son was probably checking his traps. In another cabin, their daughter was likely tending to a patient. Their grandchildren were scattered throughout the area, building lives of their own. "I am proud of what we built," Archer said. "This family, this life. I am proud that I got to do it with you." "I am proud too, and grateful, so very grateful." The sun cleared the peaks, bathing everything in golden light. Archer squeezed her hand and Violet squeezed back. After more than 30 years together, they did not always need words. Sometimes a touch was enough to communicate everything they felt. "Want to walk to our clearing today?" Archer asked. "I would love that." They stood slowly, bodies protesting the movement as bodies did after so many years. But they walked hand in hand down the path they had worn smooth over decades, through the forest that had become as familiar as their own heartbeats, to the clearing where wildflowers bloomed eternal. They sat on their bench, and Archer wrapped an arm around his wife, pulling her close. Violet rested her head on his shoulder and sighed with contentment. The view was just as beautiful as it had been the first time he had brought her here, the mountains majestic and unchanging. "Thank you," Violet said softly. "For what? For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For making sure I had what I needed. For loving me so completely. For giving me this life." Archer kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for taking a chance on a broken-down mountain man. For making our cabin a home. For giving me a family I never thought I deserved. For loving me back." They sat for a long time, wrapped in each other and in memories. Eventually they would head back down to the cabin, back to their children and grandchildren and the life they had built. But for now, in this moment, it was just the two of them, together as they had been since that day 30 years ago when a desperate seamstress and a lonely mountain man found each other and changed both their lives forever. The sun climbed higher in the sky. The wildflowers swayed in the breeze. And Archer and Violet held each other close, grateful for every moment they had shared and every moment still to come. They had started with nothing but each other, and they had built something beautiful. A life full of love and family and simple happiness. The seamstress who had once sewn for everyone else finally had everything she needed, thanks to the mountain man who had made sure she was taken care of. And the mountain man who had hidden from the world found his reason to live, thanks to the woman who had seen past his rough exterior to the gentle heart beneath. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had created something that would last long after they were gone. A legacy of love that would live on in their children and grandchildren, and in all the lives they had touched along the way. As the years continued to pass, Archer and Violet remained devoted to each other. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by 4 grandchildren, numerous friends, and a community that had come to respect and love them both. The party was held in Wallace, in the very building where Violet's shop had once stood, though it had long since been converted to other purposes. 50 years, Mrs. Henderson said, now ancient herself but still sharp as ever. "I remember when you were just a girl sewing in that shop, and Archer was the mysterious mountain man who came to town. I knew there was something between you two from the start. Violet smiled. Mrs. Henderson had done no such thing, had in fact been scandalized by their courtship. But time had a way of softening memories. Their children gave speeches, talking about growing up in the mountains, about the love their parents had shown them and each other. Thomas spoke of his father's strength and gentleness, how Archer had taught him to be a good man. Sarah talked about her mother's resilience and kindness, how Violet had shown her that a woman could be both strong and soft. But the moment that mattered most came at the end of the evening when it was just Archer and Violet again, walking slowly back to the boarding house where they were staying the night. 50 years, Archer said, echoing Mrs. Henderson. Seems impossible. Seems like just yesterday you walked into my shop. Best day of my life. Mine too. They reached the boarding house and Archer helped Violet up the steps. His movements were slower now, his strength finally beginning to fade, but he was still taking care of her, still making sure she was safe. In their room, they prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of decades together. Archer helped Violet with the buttons she could no longer manage with her arthritic fingers. She helped him with his boots, which his back no longer allowed him to reach comfortably. They lay down together in the narrow bed, just as they had on their wedding night all those years ago, though in a different boarding house and different bodies. But the feeling was the same, the sense of rightness, of being exactly where they belonged. I love you, Archer whispered in the darkness. Today, tomorrow, always. I love you too. Forever. They fell asleep holding hands, and if either of them dreamed, it was of meadows full of wildflowers and a cabin in the mountains where love had built a home. The following winter proved harsh, colder than any in recent memory. Archer's health began to decline, his strong body finally succumbing to the years. He spent more time resting, less time working, though he still insisted on doing what he could. Violet cared for him with the same devotion he had shown her throughout their marriage. She made him comfortable, prepared his favorite foods, sat with him by the fire and reminisced about their life together. I am sorry, he said one evening, his voice weaker than it used to be. I wanted to give you more time. You have given me everything, a lifetime of love and happiness, 2 beautiful children, a home, everything I ever wanted or needed. You have nothing to apologize for. I wish I could have a few more years. I am not ready to leave you. Tears filled her eyes. I am not ready to let you go, but I am grateful for every moment we have had. Every single moment. He reached for her hand. Promise me something, anything. Promise me you will be happy after I am gone, that you will not just sit and mourn. Go sit in our clearing sometimes. Watch the wildflowers bloom. Tell our grandchildren stories about me. Live, Violet, for both of us, I promise. But you have to promise me something too. What is that? That you will wait for me. Wherever we go after this, that you will be there when it is my time. I will wait forever if I have to, but I am hoping it will not be long. I cannot imagine being apart from you for very long. In early March, as the first hints of spring began to show, Archer passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was lying in their bed in the cabin he had built, surrounded by his family, holding Violet's hand. The grief was crushing, but Violet bore it with the same strength she had shown throughout her life. She mourned deeply, but she also remembered her promise. She told their grandchildren stories about their grandfather. She walked to their clearing and sat on the bench, feeling his presence in the wildflowers and the wind. She continued to sew, creating quilts and baby clothes for the ever-growing family. She welcomed a great-grandchild into the world and marveled at the continuation of the legacy she and Archer had begun. At night, alone in the bed they had shared for so long, she would talk to him as though he were still there. She told him about her day, about the children, about how much she missed him. And sometimes, in the quiet darkness, she could almost hear his voice answering back. 3 years after Archer died, on a spring morning when the meadow was full of wildflowers just as he had promised it would be all those decades ago, Violet passed away peacefully. Sarah found her in the clearing, sitting on the bench she and Archer had built together, a gentle smile on her face. They buried her beside Archer, in a spot overlooking the meadow they had both loved. The entire community came to pay their respects, and people spoke of the love story that had become legend in the area. The mountain man and the seamstress who had found each other against all odds and built a life that inspired everyone who knew them. Their children and grandchildren continued to thrive, carrying forward the lessons of love and devotion they had learned from Archer and Violet. The cabin remained in the family, a gathering place for generations to come. And in the clearing high up the mountain, wildflowers continued to bloom around the bench where 2 initials were carved inside a heart. The story of Violet and Archer became one that was told and retold, each generation adding their own memories and perspectives. But the heart of it remained the same, a testament to the power of seeing someone truly, of caring for them selflessly, of building something lasting together. The seamstress who had once sewn for everyone else, while wearing rags, had found someone who made sure she had what she needed. The mountain man who had hidden from the world had found someone who brought him back to life. Together they had created a love that transcended time, a family that flourished, and a legacy that would never be forgotten in the end. Theirs was a simple story. 2 lonely people who found each other and chose love every day for the rest of their lives. But sometimes the simple stories are the most powerful ones, the ones that remind us what really matters. And in the mountains of Idaho Territory, where wildflowers still bloom in hidden clearings and streams still babble their eternal songs, the love of Archer Yates and Violet Zimmerman lives on. A reminder that the greatest gift we can give another person is to truly see them and care for them and choose them, every single day, no matter what comes. Their story ended as all stories must, but the love they shared never truly died. It lived on in their children and grandchildren, and in everyone who heard their tale and was inspired to love more deeply, to care more fully, to see the people around them not just as they appeared but as they truly were. The seamstress and the mountain man had found each other in a little shop in Wallace, Idaho Territory, in the year 1878. They had built a life together that spanned decades, weathered storms, celebrated joys, and ultimately created something beautiful and lasting. They had been exactly what each other needed, arriving in each other's lives at precisely the right moment. And if love could echo through the years, if devotion could transcend death, then somewhere in those mountains, on spring mornings when the wildflowers bloom, you might still feel their presence. The strength and gentleness of the mountain man, the resilience and kindness of the seamstress. The love they shared that changed everything. Their story was complete, their ending bittersweet but fitting. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure. And in the end, that was all anyone could hope for, to be remembered not for what they had but for how they loved, and Archer and Violet had loved extraordinarily well.